But let's just say that maybe giants did exist in the past. There should be more evidence, at least more than just myths and legends. And maybe there is. If we start taking a closer look into ancient megalithic constructions, there's so much about it that we still don't know to this day. In ancient Egypt, we have the pyramids and many other megalithic constructions that to this day no one knows exactly how they were built. Some of these stones weigh more than hundreds of tons, and they are not local stones.
And again, it's believed that the boxes themselves weigh how much?
70 ton for the box and 30 ton for the lid. So the total of 100 ton for the box and the lid.
And this is not local stone?
No, this is not local stone.
Where was it brought from, do you think?
Not closer than Aswan, which is 1,000 kilometers from here.
People would have to travel thousands of kilometers just to get these stones where they are today. How was it done that long ago? Well, no one knows. There are many theories, of course, but none proven. The same with the statues located in the eastern island. Some of these statues weigh around 80 tons and are more than 10 meters tall. It's big, and there are many of them. How did they get there? And who do they represent? I mean, it's a really small island in the middle of nowhere. How? In Japan, there are also many strange megalithic constructions. For example, in 1987, a local diver exploring off the coast of Japan's Ryukyu Islands stumbled across a startling discovery. What looked like a gigantic underwater pyramid was spotted 25 meters below the surface. Known today as the Yonaguni Monument, this massive construction is one of the world's most unusual underwater sites. Nicknamed Japan's Atlantis, the rectangular, pyramid-like monument is believed to be at least 10,000 years old. Now, I could go on for hours talking about these megalithic constructions. There's also Stonehenge, the Ellora Caves system. There's also the mysterious megalithic site of Gunung Padang in Indonesia. Now, what's very curious about Gunung Padang is that in 2018, Indonesian scientists presented data to make their case that maybe Gunung Padang is in fact one of the world's oldest known pyramid-like structures. Their research, which has been conducted over the course of several years, suggests that Gunung Padang is not just a hill as we think it is, but is actually a layered series of ancient structures with foundations dating back to some 10,000 years ago or maybe even more. But Gunung Padang isn't the only place where you'll find these mysterious rocks sort of laying around in an organized pattern. There's one place in Nigeria in Africa, one that most people don't even know exists, called Dutsen Mamaki, and it really looks a little bit like Gunung Padang. But all this could be just a big coincidence, couldn't it? If it weren't for the fact that in some of these megalithic sites, you'll not only find giant footprints laying around,
Encuentro a 80 kilómetros de la ciudad de Tarija, en el departamento. Les voy a mostrar una huella. Aquí, por ejemplo, ustedes ven la parte del talón que va formando el pie, sus dedos, el dedo grande o gordo a mi pie. Es enorme, ¿no?
but also depictions and sometimes hieroglyphs of giant humanoid figures walking amongst humans. This might actually suggest that something happened in the past, something that we're not being told about.
First Enoch relates an incredible story, a remarkable tale. And it turns out that this story lays the foundation for some of the most enigmatic references in the Old and New Testament of the Bible. So this isn't just some fanciful fiction that the Hebrews told their children at nighttime, some bedtime story. The story of First Enoch is foundational to Hebrew cosmology, to ancient Hebrew cosmology. You cannot remove the Enochian tale from ancient Hebrew cosmology. That's how foundational it is. And the story involves a company of 200 angels who the Book of Enoch denominates watchers. And these angels were observing the daughters of men. And of course, this is the reference in Genesis 6. They were observing the daughters of men. They saw that they were comely, that they were fair, that they were beautiful. And they desired to take them as wives. In fact, their desire, there's two explicit things they desired, two things that are conspicuous and one thing that is inconspicuous. Two things that are directly mentioned, and the final motivation is inferred. So there's three motivations here. So the first thing we have to understand about the story of the Watchers is that there are three motivating factors that led to this transgression, which forms the beginning of the narrative, the historical narrative in the Book of Enoch. And the first motivation is the Watchers desired to marry and copulate with the daughters of men. So they desired to wed these women and to impregnate them. The second desire was to progenerate through them their own offspring. They wanted to procreate and have children with their wives, with their human wives. That's the second motivation. The third motivation, and the first two are implicit, the third one is inferred. So the first two motivations are implicit in the text, in the narrative of First Enoch. This third motivation that I'm going to explain is inferred in what happens. And the third motivation is they wanted to usurp dominion of the earth from the sons of Adam through the agency of their hybrid offspring.
So Genesis chapter 6, verse 1 and 2. Now the first thing I want you to notice before we get in this, I want you to notice verse 1 and 2 are a single sentence. It's amazing how much confusion has been generated by splitting that single sentence into the two verses. Genesis 6, verse 1 and 2. It came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. Well, the first thing it hits us is sons of God. What does that phrase really mean? The sons of God. You want you to notice when men began to multiply, that's men in general. No particular subset, we're just men multiplied on the face of the earth, and they had daughters. We're talking daughters in general. We're not talking about a specific group of daughters. We're born of them, that the sons of God, whoever they were, we'll come back to that, saw the daughters of men that they were fair, they were attractive. I assume that was a general attribution. And they took them wives of all which they chose. That's kind of a strange phrase, by the way. In the Hebrew especially, it implies that the wives didn't have much choice about it. They took them wives of all which they chose. And so now, what about this word, sons of God? In the Hebrew, it's Bnei Elohim, Ha-Elohim, sons of God. But it's a phrase, to understand what it means, we need to examine the rest of the Bible. And you'll discover something interesting. That phrase is used of a direct creation of God. Okay, what did that include? Adam was a son of God. He was a direct creation of God. He fell, become sinful. You and I, as natural-born sons and daughters, are sons and daughters of Adam. in the natural. We have a genetic defect. It's called sin. Therefore, we die. Well, babies are innocent. No, they die also. See, even though they may be given certain allowances by God until they get the age of accountability, they also have a genetic defect called sin. We're sons of Adam, not sons of God. The term son of God in the Scripture is always used of a direct creation of God. That includes Adam and it includes the angels. In fact, that particular phrase, if you search the entire Old Testament in the Hebrew, it's always used of angels. It's when these angels, now these are fallen angels, these are bad guys, you'll see in a minute. When they found some way to procreate with human women, they gave birth to hybrids. They were different than either of their parents because they were part human and part not human. And these were the Nephilim. And this idea shocks many people. It's very disturbing to many people, but let's try to keep an open mind and see what the Scripture says and see what implications it has in our understanding, not just of the flood of Noah, but the rest of the Old Testament. Now, again, the Septuagint takes this word, Nephilim, and treats it, translated as gigantes. Because it's gigantes, when they translated from the Septuagint to the English, they called them giants. It sounded like giants. That's not what the word means, by the way, but you can understand why they did that. They really transliterated. So they translated in most English Bibles as giants. The word comes from gigos, which means earthborn. And it's the same word that they use in Greek mythology for titans. Titans in Greek mythology were the offspring of gods, Greek gods, cohabiting with women. They were the demigods, half god, half man. Titans, Atlas, Hercules, these were in mythology these kinds of creatures. So that's what the word used for. The word genea means to breed or be of a certain kind. And the English word genes or genetics comes from the same Greek root. And there may be a linkage here that may surprise you that we'll get into this a little bit. Well, Genesis 3 said, "And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. So from this announcement, there's 120 years before the big event, which we'll talk about. And then verse 4, there were giants in the earth in those days. That's the way it would be in your Bible. The word is Nephilim. We're going to talk a lot about Nephilim in the earth in those days. And notice this, and also after that, these things occurred in those days, and they gave rise to the flood. But there's a phrase in here we're going to come back to later. And also after that, it didn't end with the flood. It was so universal that the flood dealt with it. But we're going to discover it wasn't limited to that. There's been some incidents since then. Anyway, and when the sons of God, the Benaiah Elohim, came in unto the Benoth Adam, and they bare children unto them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. Now, when you get down to verse 9, we're going to be dealing with some other verses here in a minute, but I want to look ahead a little bit. In verse 9 of chapter 6, there is a remark about Noah that unless you're very careful, unless you do some exegetical homework, you'll miss the meaning of it. It says, these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. Now here's that phrase again. We ran into that phrase with Enoch, didn't we? Noah walked with God. He was a just man. That doesn't mean he was sinless, but it does mean he was righteous before God because he was faithful and obedient. But there's a phrase in here that most people miss. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations. And Noah walked with God. Now that word perfect in the Hebrew is tamim. It always refers to a physical blemish. Tamim means without a blemish, sound, healthful, without spot. Unblemished, in other words, unimpaired. Well, wait a minute. What does it mean when it says that his genealogy was unimpaired? You see, it wasn't tainted by these goings-on with these fallen angels. the human race was getting contaminated. In fact, I believe it was Satan's strategy to contaminate the human race to prevent a Redeemer that was promised in Genesis 3. But Noah is an exception. He may not have been the only exception, but what was distinctive with Noah and his gang is that they were untainted by these goings-on of the Nephilim, of the fallen angels. Now you say, gee, this sounds pretty weird stuff, Chuck. You're saying that these angels cohabited with women and gave birth to hybrids. Well, if that's a pretty weird idea. But if it's true, it's going to be confirmed in at least 2 places elsewhere in the Bible, right? 2 or 3 witnesses the law requires. If you turn to Jude, verse 6 and 7, that's the book just before the book of Revelation in the New Testament. Jude is making an argument that I'm not going to try to recreate here to take the time, but in his argument, he makes reference in verse 6 of this little book. He says, "And the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of that great day." So Jude here, Jude's the brother of Jesus Christ, he's writing this little short epistle. He's speaking of angels that did something wrong. They kept not their first estate, but they left their own habitation. I'll come back to that word in a minute. He hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of their great day. Then he goes on to amplify this for us in verse 7. He says, "Even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them, in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh, are set forth for an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire." So here we have an allusion by Jude that these angels, which apparently went after strange flesh, which God, because of that, they are reserved in everlasting chains and under darkness. So they're given a very special treatment. Well, this left their own habitation, going after strange flesh. These are angels it's talking about here. The word habitation, here's another technicality. You'll find, you won't find this in most textbooks, but let me just give the word in the Greek in the habitation is okaterion. It only occurs twice in the New Testament. Here in Jude, and in 2 Corinthians 5:2. What does this word okaterion mean? It means habitation, like a habit or a habitation. Well, it's used only twice in the Bible. In Jude 6 we just read, it's what these angels left. These angels left their habitation. Here it says, in a positive sense, it's speaking of the believer. "For in this we groan, earnestly desiring to be clothed upon with our," and the same word, okaterion, "which is from heaven." When we put this together, the angels that sinned shed the place they were living in, the body they were living in order to participate in this sin with human beings. That term is the body that you and I aspire to. We would use the term resurrection body. See, for in this we groan, earnestly desiring to be clothed upon with our habit or habitation, house, which is from heaven. You and I, as believers, aspire to having an okaterion, which is given to us by God. It's our immortal bodies. But that term is what these angels shed in order to participate in this mischief in Genesis 6. Let's look at another place. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4 and 5. Peter makes a reference to the same thing again. He says, "For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to Tartarus," I'll come back to that word, "and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah," and then he goes on. So Peter does 2 things here. He introduces to a word Tartarus, I'll come back to, but he also links these angels that sinned with the days of Noah. See, God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down, delivered them into chains of darkness, reserved unto judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah, and he goes on to talk about Noah and the ark and all that business. Now, he uses the word Tartarus. That word does not occur anywhere else in the Bible. It's translated hell in your English Bible. But what kind of a hell is it? The word Tartarus in the Greek is widely used in Greek, not in biblical Greek, but in Greek. Tartarus is the Greek term for a dark abode of woe. In fact, it's considered the pit of darkness in the unseen world. In Homer's Iliad, that classic Greek thing, it is rendered as far below Hades as the earth is below heaven. What does that mean? I don't know, but I don't want to go there. Okay? Now, it's very possible that it might be synonymous with the abuso. That's speculation. We're not sure. We'll see. But that's another story. Now, what's interesting about this weird view that I'm sharing with you about Genesis 6, we'll discover that that same idea is embodied in the myths and legends of every culture, ancient culture on the planet Earth. We're best known as the Greek Titans. The Greek mythology speaks of these demigods that are partly terrestrial, partly celestial. They apparently rebelled against their father Uranus, and after a prolonged contest they were defeated by Zeus and condemned into Tartarus. Again,